I'm sorry to bother you, Lucas said, voice shaking. But my baby hasn't eaten in 2 days. Please, I heard you might have breast milk. The woman opened the door slowly. Her eyes were hollow. In her arms, not a baby, but a doll. He won't take formula? She asked softly. Lucas nodded, tears burning. I'm begging you. She looked at the crying child in his arms, then whispered, Come in. A baby on the edge of starvation, a father out of options, and a mysterious woman who opened her door, holding not a baby, but a doll. What happened next would silence the baby's cries and awaken a love neither of them saw coming. There are nights that break you, and then there are nights that redefine you. Lucas sat on the cold kitchen floor, back pressed against the cabinet door, eyes hollow from nights without sleep. His right hand clutched a half-mixed bottle of formula, now lukewarm and forgotten. His left hand trembled in his lap, not from the chill, but from something far deeper, something that lived in his bones since the moment his world cracked open. Micah, his 6-week-old son, screamed beside him in the carrier, the sound raw and rasping. His tiny fists waved in the air, his body arched in protest, his cries echoing through the empty apartment like sirens. Lucas had tried everything, different formulas, different temperatures, singing lullabies his wife once hummed as she folded laundry. Rocking, shushing, praying, nothing worked. Micah wanted what was no longer there, his mother. Emily had died just hours after giving birth, a sudden hemorrhage that even the best doctors couldn't stop. 1 minute, Lucas had been holding her hand, promising her they'd figure it out together. The next, he was staring at her, still form under harsh hospital lights, their baby wailing in a bassinet just feet away. Since then, it had just been the two of them, and Micah was slipping. Lucas stared at the ceiling, voice cracking. Please, I can't lose him too. He didn't even realize he was crying until a drop hit his hand. In desperation, he reached for his phone. Fingers shaking, heart pounding, he opened a local parenting forum he joined but never posted in. Most of the time it was just diaper recommendations and daycare reviews. But now it was his last hope. My name is Lucas. I'm a single father. My son won't take formula. He was born premature. My wife passed during childbirth. If anyone has breast milk to share, please, I'll drive anywhere. I'll pay. I just want to feed my son. He hit post and stared at the screen. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. Then the message notification chimed. The username was simple. Eleanor. I saw your post. I have milk. I don't need money. I lost my baby recently, but I have more than I know what to do with. If you're willing to trust me, I can help. Lucas blinked. A stranger. No profile picture. No mutual friends. But something in her words felt honest. He replied hesitantly, Thank you. Can we talk more first? I just need to make sure it's safe. Of course, she wrote. Ask me anything. I understand. Lucas exhaled. For the first time in days, he felt something that wasn't panic or grief. It was something quieter, fragile, hope. And that's when a story of shattered hearts took a turn that not even fate could have predicted. Lucas hadn't slept in nearly 2 days. 40 hours of pacing, rocking, whispering lullabies into the cold night air. None of it had worked. Micah cried endlessly. Not the sharp cry of a baby needing a diaper change or warmth, but the hoarse, heart-wrenching wail of a child who hungered for something deeper, for a mother he'd never get to know. Since Emily died giving birth, time had warped for Lucas. He used to know hours by their rhythm, shift changes, feeding schedules, sunrise sirens. As a paramedic, he'd once been trained to remain calm in chaos. Now chaos was home. He delivered babies in back seats, restarted hearts on sidewalks, and comforted mothers in burning houses. But none of that prepared him for the helplessness of watching his own child slowly wither from hunger. Micah wouldn't take formula. Lucas had tried every brand. He'd boiled and cooled bottles, rocked him in different positions, tried feeding him skin to skin. The nurses had told him sometimes babies rejected substitutes if their first experience was disrupted by grief or trauma. But they didn't offer a solution, just sympathy, and sympathy didn't stop the cries. That night, as the wind howled outside and the radiator hissed behind the faded wallpaper of their old apartment, Lucas sat on the floor beside the crib, knees drawn to his chest, Micah curled up and sobbing in his arms. His fingers shook as he scrolled through a parenting forum, posts of happy babies, sleeping tips, new dads celebrating milestones. He felt like a ghost scrolling through the lives of the living. Then in a private Facebook group for single parents, he wrote, "I'm not sure where else to post this. My name is Lucas. I'm a single father. My wife Emily died during childbirth 3 weeks ago. My son Micah won't eat. He refuses every formula. I've tried everything. I'm desperate. If anyone out there has breast milk to spare, even just a few ounces, please, I'll pay anything. I'll drive anywhere. Please don't judge me. I just want to keep him alive." He stared at the screen after hitting send, throat tight, eyes red. His pride had long since dissolved, stripped away by fear and sleepless nights. He was no longer worried about looking weak. He was just a father on the edge. Minutes passed, then an hour. He refreshed the post at least a dozen times. One or two people offered kind words. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Have you tried donor banks?" Sending prayers. But there was only one reply that mattered. It came at 2:14 a.m. No profile picture, no location, no pleasantries. Just a message. "I can help. I lost my child not long ago. I still have milk. You don't need to pay. Just trust me." Lucas stared at it for a long time. No name, no background. He clicked the profile. Private, empty, no mutual friends. A scam, a trap, or a lifeline? Micah whimpered softly against his chest, lips dry, breath shallow. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, darker, colder. Lucas replied, "Where are you?" A minute later, she sent an address. It was across town on the edge of the rural district, almost an hour away. Lucas hesitated. Every instinct screamed caution, but he had nothing left. No sleep, no formula, no support, just his son, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, a stranger's kindness could do what medicine couldn't. He packed quickly, diapers, wipes, the last clean blanket. He wrapped Micah in a warm sweater that still smelled like Emily and whispered, "Hang on, little guy. Just a bit longer." As snow began to fall, Lucas strapped Micah into the car seat, turned on the headlights and began the longest drive of his life, toward an unknown house, an unknown woman, and the faintest flicker of hope. Lucas hadn't spoken for most of the drive. The snow was coming down harder now, a quiet, relentless curtain that blurred the world outside his windshield. His hands gripped the wheel until his knuckles whitened, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. What kind of woman lived in a house that far from town? What kind of stranger still produced milk for a child she no longer had? What kind of grief drives someone to message a man she's never met in the middle of the night? Just to offer hope? And yet here he was, driving past shuttered gas stations, down narrowing roads, toward a flickering pin on his GPS. Beside him, Micah whimpered weakly in his carrier, his cries more whimper than scream now, fading like a flame burning its last. The house appeared through the trees like a forgotten dream, massive, creaking, wrapped in vines and shadow. It looked like it hadn't known laughter in years. The driveway was half covered in snow. No cars, no lights except for a faint amber glow in one window. Lucas pulled up, turned off the ignition, and sat there for a full minute. Then he whispered, "Okay, buddy," and stepped out into the cold. The wind cut through his coat as he cradled Micah close and approached the door. His boots crunched against the icy steps. He raised a hand to knock, then stopped. The door creaked open before he touched it. A woman stood in the doorway. She was barefoot, pale, wrapped in a thick shawl that looked handwoven. Her face was delicate but hollow, as if time had drained her rather than aged her. She had no makeup, no pretense. In her arms was a baby, or so it seemed. Lucas blinked and realized it was a doll. A doll dressed in a blue onesie, its plastic hands curled as if still waiting for warmth. Every instinct in Lucas screamed danger. Fear prickled down his spine. He tightened his grip on Micah. But then, he looked at her eyes, not wide or wild, just sad. A kind of sadness so deep it wasn't threatening. It was human. "I'm sorry," Lucas said, voice cracking. I, I must have the wrong—" "No," she interrupted softly. "You're Lucas." He nodded slowly, his breath visible in the freezing air. "And you're Eleanor?" She nodded. Then her eyes dropped to Micah. Her arms adjusted the doll in a practiced movement, a mother's movement. And then, with trembling hands, she placed the doll gently onto a table just inside the door. "You said he won't feed?" Lucas nodded, jaw clenched. "It's been almost 2 days. He won't take formula. He just cries. Or he used to. Now he's too tired to even cry." "I know that cry," Eleanor said quietly. "It's the sound a child makes when they're searching for someone they'll never find." Lucas swallowed. He could barely speak. "I don't know what else to do." Eleanor looked up at him. "I do." She stepped back and opened the door wider. Lucas hesitated for only a second, then crossed the threshold. The warmth of the house was immediate and soft, faint smells of dried lavender, old wood, and something else. Milk? The living room was dimly lit by a single lamp near a worn rocking chair. A framed photo of a baby boy set on a nearby shelf. Lucas glanced at it without asking. He didn't need to. "I had a son," Eleanor said, catching his gaze. "Jonah. He lived 3 months." Lucas exhaled slowly. "I'm so sorry." She nodded, not in acknowledgement of sympathy, but in recognition of shared loss. "Would you like me to?" she asked gently, reaching toward Micah. Lucas looked down at his son. Micah stirred, fussing softly. He hesitated. This woman was a stranger holding a doll, grieving in silence in a house that felt frozen in time, and yet his son needed her. Lucas handed Micah over. Eleanor cradled him like he was the most fragile thing on earth. She moved with practiced grace, sitting in the rocking chair by the fire. She adjusted her shawl and loosened her blouse. And then Micah latched. It was immediate, natural, like he'd always been waiting for her. Lucas stood frozen, eyes wide, mouth half open. He couldn't believe it. Micah's body relaxed for the first time in days. His little hands stopped clawing. His breathing slowed. The room filled with the soft sounds of a baby feeding. Lucas sank to his knees. He didn't cry. Not yet. But something broke open in him. Not in a destructive way. In a healing one. And for Eleanor, it wasn't about replacing Jonah. It was about saving Micah. And maybe in the process, saving herself. After that night, the night Micah finally fed, Lucas found himself returning to Eleanor's house every morning. Snow still clung to the trees like a quiet memory, and the roads were nearly always empty. But inside that old manor, a strange warmth had begun to grow. Lucas would arrive just after sunrise. He never rang the bell anymore. He didn't need to. Eleanor would already be waiting at the door, holding that same baby doll, until she saw Micah's sleepy eyes and reached for him instead. He'd make tea. She'd settle near the fireplace, Micah tucked against her chest, breathing slow and steady. Some mornings no one said a word, and yet it felt like everything was being spoken. Lucas began tidying up bits of her home, gently wiping dust from picture frames, fixing a crooked cabinet door, repotting a wilting plant. Not because she asked, but because it felt like restoring pieces of both their lives. And Eleanor, in return, began telling stories. She spoke of Jonah, not the tragedy, but the joy, his laugh, the way he loved yellow socks, how he once tried to feed their dog a blueberry pancake, convinced it would make the dog smile. Each story stitched something back together. They weren't healing by talking about pain. They were healing by living through mornings, together. Not as strangers, not as broken people, but as two hearts learning to beat again in the quiet. It started with a single photo. A neighbor, curious or perhaps simply nosy, had snapped a picture through a frosted window. Eleanor seated in her armchair, breastfeeding Micah. The image was intimate, raw, and without context easily misunderstood. By the next morning it was everywhere. Millionaire widow nurse's stranger's baby. Is this grief or obsession? Should a woman who lost her child be allowed near another? The internet exploded with opinions. Some were cruel, others concerned. A few offered quiet praise. But the noise, endless and unforgiving, descended on Eleanor like a tidal wave. Reporters swarmed the gates of her estate. Old headlines about Jonah resurfaced. People who had never met her debated her sanity. They speculated about Micah, about Lucas, about her motives. Eleanor didn't speak. She retreated further inside. Lucas, however, could not stay silent. He stood before a dozen microphones outside his small apartment. His voice shook, but his words did not. My son was starving. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for anything. She gave him life when I had nothing left to give. She saved us. He shared Emily's name. He told the truth about those sleepless nights, about Micah's hunger, about the message that changed everything. I don't care what the world thinks, he said, but maybe someone out there is going through the same pain we did. And maybe now, they'll have hope. In that moment, the narrative shifted, not completely, not for everyone. But for those who needed the story most, the truth rang louder than the noise. The invitation came quietly but carried weight. A national talk show wanted Lucas to speak. The segment was titled, Would You Trust a Stranger with Your Child? Under studio lights, Lucas sat alone. Cameras rolled. The host leaned forward, sympathetic but probing. Why did you let a woman you barely knew nurse your son? Lucas didn't flinch. He spoke first of Emily, how she died bringing Micah into the world, how he held his wife's hand as it went cold and held his son's body as it went limp from hunger. He described those days, sleepless, hopeless, and hollow. I tried everything, he said. Formula, bottles, doctors. Nothing worked. He was fading, and so was I. Then his voice softened. And then, a message from Eleanor. He shared how Eleanor didn't ask questions, didn't ask for money. She opened her door and her heart. I didn't give my son to a stranger, Lucas said, looking directly into the camera. I gave him to someone who understood what it means to lose everything and still choose to give. In her quiet home, Eleanor watched the interview unfold on a flickering screen. She had never heard him say her name so tenderly. But what shattered her completely was his final sentence. She didn't just save Micah, she saved me. And whatever people say, I consider her family. The kind you don't choose by blood, but by love. Tears slipped silently down her face as she pressed the baby doll close to her chest. For the first time in years, the weight of her grief didn't feel like it was only hers to carry. Lucas had made it known to the world. She wasn't alone anymore. The idea was born quietly, almost unintentionally, over one of their peaceful mornings. Lucas had just laid Micah down for a nap, and Eleanor was sorting through an old wooden box filled with handwritten letters, notes she had once written to Jonah. Lucas sat beside her and read one. It broke him. I never got to write letters to Emily, he whispered, but I remember every word she said the night Micah was born. They didn't speak for a while. Then Eleanor closed the box and looked at him. What if we wrote something together, something real, something that might help someone else survive what we didn't know how to survive? And so began the book. They called it Kindness Fed Us. The title was simple, but the meaning behind it carried the weight of everything they had been through. Lucas wrote in short, visceral bursts, his chapters a mix of raw memory and reflection. He wrote about Emily, about the night she died, about the look on Micah's face when he first refused to eat, about the guilt of being alive when she was not, and about the moment a message from a stranger became a lifeline. Eleanor's writing flowed like old letters. She shared her heartbreak after Jonah's death and the lonely years that followed. Her sections included pieces of her journal, things never meant for anyone else to read. Grief sat heavy in her words, but so did grace. She wrote about Micah not as a replacement, but as a miracle who reminded her that her love didn't die with her son. It simply had nowhere to go until it found a new direction. The book also held full-color photographs, Micah smiling in Eleanor's lap, Lucas reading to him beneath a quilt, and even one photo of the baby doll Eleanor once held when she couldn't let go. When Kindness Fed Us was published, they didn't expect it to reach far. But it did. Grieving parents wrote letters. Nurses handed it out in maternity wards. Fathers who had once thought they were alone now carried that book like a roadmap. It became a quiet phenomenon, not because it was sensational, but because it was true. In the final chapter, Lucas wrote, kindness didn't just feed Micah, it fed two broken people who thought they'd lost everything. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave us a reason to keep waking up. The story had always been theirs. Now it belonged to the world. And in every heart it touched, the same seed was planted. That love, in its quietest form, still saves. The air in Eleanor's home had grown lighter, not in decoration or design, but in spirit. Lucas and Micah now visited daily, sometimes staying until dusk. Their presence filled once hollow rooms with warmth, like sun filtering through old windows. One afternoon, while Lucas was fixing a leaky faucet, Eleanor decided to clear out a long-forgotten cedar chest tucked beneath the stairs. Inside were the remains of a life paused, tiny clothes, hospital wristbands, and a delicate baby bib. It was hand-stitched. Faded blue thread spelled out one word: Jonah. Eleanor sat frozen for a long moment, her hands trembling as she traced the name. It had been years since she'd seen it, years since she had allowed herself to open that part of her heart. Grief, as she had come to learn, doesn't leave. It waits patiently in the corners. She gently placed the bib on top of the dresser in the living room, its smallness a stark contrast to the enormity of the memory it carried. Micah, crawling nearby, had been watching her. Then, without warning, he pushed himself up on wobbly legs. Lucas turned just in time to see it. One step, then another. Micah's eyes were fixed on Eleanor, not as if she were a stranger, but as if he recognized something in her. A softness, a safety. She knelt, hands out, too stunned to speak. And in the soft hush of the afternoon, Micah took his first unassisted steps. Straight into her arms. Eleanor broke. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clutched him to her chest. "You're here," she whispered. "Both of you, still here." She didn't mean Micah and Lucas. She meant Jonah, and the love that had never truly left her. That moment wasn't just about a milestone. It was a message. That healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding space in your heart where old love and new love can coexist. And in that quiet room, as Lucas watched from the doorway, they all knew. Some steps are small, but some change everything. The little independent bookstore on Oak Street was never meant to host events like this. Its shelves leaned slightly, and its chairs creaked with age. But that day it was overflowing, not with noise, but with hearts wide open. Lucas sat on the left. Eleanor sat on the right. Micah, in his little suspenders and mismatched socks, sat between them, chewing on a corner of the book, Kindness Fed Us. They weren't lovers. They weren't blood. But they were, undeniably, family. People lined up not just for a signature, but for a moment. A chance to say thank you. To share how the story helped them grieve a parent, forgive a child, or love again after loss. One woman whispered, "Your book helped me hold my granddaughter again." An older man with trembling hands said, "You reminded me that kindness still exists." It wasn't about fame or sales. It was about connection. Lucas glanced sideways at Eleanor. She was smiling softly, eyes damp but steady. She had never looked more at peace. He leaned closer and whispered, "We were broken once, but now we're whole in a different way." Eleanor placed her hand over his. "We chose each other," she said. Behind them, on a small display stand, sat the baby bib that once belonged to Jonah, next to a framed photo of Emily. Two souls they had loved and lost, and carried forward in quiet tribute. That afternoon, as the sun dipped beyond the bookstore window, strangers became friends. Grief became grace. And in the warmth of pages signed and stories shared, something unspoken passed between the trio. Home isn't always where you start. Sometimes it's the place where broken hearts come together and choose to begin again. In a world that often moves too fast, this story reminds us of something deeply American, deeply human, that family isn't always made by blood. It's made by choice, by compassion, by showing up when it matters most. Lucas lost everything he thought made him whole. Eleanor carried a grief so silent it echoed through every room she walked into. But together, with a baby between them and kindness as their compass, they chose healing. They chose to turn their sorrow into sanctuary. In today's society where isolation is a quiet epidemic and connections can feel fleeting, stories like this remind us that sometimes one stranger's hand is all it takes to save another. Kindness isn't just a virtue, it's a lifeline. So what does chosen family mean to you? Have you ever been saved by someone you didn't expect? Or have you been that person for someone else? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your story in the comments because somewhere out there, someone might need to read exactly what you have to say. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of a shared meal, a held hand, or a first step into a new kind of love, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Warm Soul Stories, and join us for more tales that speak straight to the heart. Because in a world that often forgets what matters most, we're here to remember. One story at a time. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being part of this family.